The massive alien ship appeared above New York City on a Tuesday morning. It was silver and shaped like a crescent moon. It blocked out the sun and cast a shadow over Manhattan that stretched for miles. People stopped their cars in the middle of the street. They stepped out and looked up at the sky with their mouths open. Nobody knew what to do. Nobody knew what to say. The world had always asked the question, are we alone in the universe? Now they had their answer, and the answer was terrifying. Within hours, every government on Earth received the same message. The aliens called themselves the Valorian Dominion. They ruled over 3,000 worlds across the galaxy. They had been watching Earth for decades, and now they had decided it was time to make contact. Ambassador Thalvex was the first alien to set foot on Earth. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. He walked like he owned the planet already. Behind him came 12 guards in silver armor, carrying weapons that glowed with strange blue light. The meeting took place at the United Nations building. Every world leader was there. Presidents, prime ministers, generals, and scientists filled the great hall. They watched as Thalvex took his place at the podium and looked down at them with something that might have been amusement. "People of Earth," he said through a translation device, "the Valorian Dominion welcomes you to the galactic community. You are a young species, primitive, but you have potential. We are here to offer you protection and guidance." General Marcus Webb of the United States stood up. He was a large man with gray hair and a face like stone. He had fought in 3 wars and had never backed down from anything in his life. "What exactly do you mean by protection?" he asked. Thalvex smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "The galaxy is a dangerous place. There are species out there that would destroy you without a second thought. The Dominion can protect you from them. All we ask in return is a small tribute: resources, labor, loyalty." The room went silent. Everyone understood what the alien was really saying. This was not an offer of friendship. This was a demand for submission. President Chen of China stood up next. "And if we refuse, then you will face correction," Thalvex said simply. "No species has ever refused the Dominion. It would be unwise to be the first." General Webb stepped forward. "Before we make any decisions, let us show you something. You have shown us your power. Now let us show you ours." The general pressed a button on his tablet. The large screens around the room came to life. They showed images of Earth's military might: tanks rolling across deserts, fighter jets cutting through the sky, aircraft carriers sailing across the ocean, missiles launching from silos, nuclear explosions turning test sites into glass. Webb watched the alien's face carefully. He expected to see surprise, maybe even fear. Instead, he saw Thalvex begin to laugh. The alien laughed for a long time. His guards laughed with him. The sound echoed through the silent hall. World leaders looked at each other in confusion and anger. "Forgive me," Thalvex finally said, wiping his eyes. "I did not mean to be rude, but I have not laughed so hard in many years. You show us these things and expect us to be impressed?" He waved his hand, and a holographic display appeared in the air. It showed Valorian weapons in action, ships that could destroy moons with a single blast, soldiers in armor that made them invincible, weapons that could level cities in seconds. "You use chemical propellants to fire metal projectiles," Thalvex said. "You use controlled explosions to push your ships into space. You split atoms and think you have discovered the ultimate weapon." He shook his head. "These are the weapons of cave dwellers. We stopped using such things 10,000 years ago." General Webb's face turned red with anger, but he said nothing. There was nothing to say. Thalvex turned to address the entire assembly. "You have 3 of your months to accept our terms. After that, we will return. If you have not submitted by then, we will correct you. Do not mistake this for a threat. It is simply a statement of fact. No species has ever defeated the Dominion. Your primitive weapons cannot hurt us. Your armies cannot stop us. Your resistance would be amusing, but ultimately pointless." He walked toward the exit, his guards following behind him. At the door, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "I strongly suggest you use these 3 months to prepare your tribute. Use them well. They may be the last peaceful months your species ever knows." Then he was gone. The silver ship rose into the sky and vanished into space, leaving Earth alone with its fear. That night, the recordings of the meeting were transmitted across the galaxy. On thousands of worlds, alien species watched and laughed at the primitive humans who thought their weapons made them powerful. They shared the videos like jokes. The humans with their metal tanks, the humans with their flying machines, the humans with their nuclear toys. It was the funniest thing the galaxy had seen in centuries. But in bunkers and war rooms across Earth, nobody was laughing. For the first time in human history, every nation put aside its differences. Old enemies became allies. Resources were shared. Scientists worked together. Soldiers trained side by side. General Webb stood before a room full of military leaders from every country on Earth. Russian generals sat next to American admirals. Chinese strategists worked with European commanders. "They think our weapons are jokes," Webb said. "They think we are primitives playing with toys." "Good. Let them think that. Let them laugh." He pulled up images on the screen. Images from human history. The trenches of World War I, the beaches of Normandy, the jungles of Vietnam, the deserts of Iraq. "They have never faced an enemy like us," he continued. "They have conquered species that surrendered after the first battle. They have never fought a species that would rather die than kneel. They look at our weapons and see primitive technology. They do not see what those weapons really are." He turned to face the assembled leaders. "Every weapon we have was forged in blood. Every tank, every rifle, every bomb represents generations of humans killing each other with terrible efficiency. We have spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy ourselves. We have become very, very good at it." A grim silence filled the room. Everyone knew what he was saying was true. Humanity had always been at war. It was the one thing they were best at. "They think they know war," Webb said. "We are going to show them that they have no idea what war really means." Outside, the stars shone cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the Dominion was waiting. In 3 months, they would return expecting an easy victory. They were about to learn that nothing involving humans was ever easy. 3 months passed faster than anyone expected. It was the busiest 3 months in human history. Factories that once made cars now made weapons. Scientists who once competed against each other now shared every secret. Old military enemies now planned together in the same rooms, studying the same enemy. Dr. Sarah Chen was one of the scientists studying the Valorian technology. She had spent 20 years building weapons for the American military. Now she worked with scientists from Russia, China, India, and a dozen other countries. They watched the holographic recordings the aliens had left behind, studying every detail. "Their shields are impressive," she said during one late-night session. "They can stop plasma weapons, laser fire, and high-speed projectiles." General Petrov of Russia leaned forward. "So they are invincible?" Sarah shook her head. "No. Their shields are designed to stop specific threats. Threats they have faced before. High-energy weapons, precise attacks, clean warfare." She pulled up images of human weapons, not the tanks and jets they had shown the aliens. Older weapons, stranger weapons. "Look at this," she said. "Cluster bombs that release thousands of smaller bombs. Thermobaric weapons that create fireballs hot enough to melt steel. Depleted uranium rounds that punch through anything and poison the ground for decades. Chemical weapons that burn skin and destroy lungs. Biological weapons that turn the body against itself." The room was quiet. Everyone knew about these weapons. Most of them had been banned by international treaties. They were too cruel, too indiscriminate, too terrible to use against other humans. "The Valorians have never seen anything like these," Sarah continued. "Their shields are designed for civilized warfare. We are not civilized. We never have been." General Webb nodded slowly. "What about their electronics? Their computers?" "Advanced beyond anything we have," Sarah admitted, "but also vulnerable. They never develop protection against electromagnetic pulses. Why would they? No species in the galaxy still uses nuclear weapons. The radiation interferes with their sensitive equipment." She smiled, and it was not a nice smile. "Every nuclear weapon we have is also an EMP bomb. One detonation in the upper atmosphere, and every Valorian device within 1,000 miles goes dark. For the first time in weeks, there was hope in the room. Not much hope, but enough. Across the planet, humanity prepared. Not just the military, everyone. In China, factory workers built missiles around the clock. In Russia, old nuclear submarines were pulled from retirement and armed with new weapons. In America, soldiers trained for a kind of warfare that had never been imagined before. In the Middle East, former enemies put aside generations of hatred to face a common threat. In Africa, countries that had been at war for decades now shared weapons and soldiers. And everywhere, people learned to fight, farmers learned to shoot, teachers learned to build bombs, children learned to hide. The entire human race became an army. The Valorians had given humanity 3 months to prepare tribute. Humanity had used that time to prepare something else entirely. In orbit around Mars, the Valorian observation fleet watched and waited. Commander Rethan commanded 12 cruisers, each one powerful enough to destroy a continent. He was not worried about the humans. He had conquered 100 species in his long career. They always submitted in the end. "Commander," one of his officers reported, "we are detecting unusual activity on the human planet." Rethan glanced at the screen. "What kind of activity?" "Industrial output has increased by 900%. Military movements across all continents. They appear to be preparing for war." Rethan laughed. "Let them prepare. Their weapons cannot hurt us. Their ships cannot reach us. They are wasting their final months of peace." He turned away from the screen. "Send a message to the humans. Remind them that their time is almost up. In 10 days, we will return for our answer." The message reached Earth within minutes. Every screen on the planet showed the same words: "Submit or face correction." In the unified command center beneath the Swiss Alps, General Webb read the message with cold eyes. Around him, the leaders of every nation on Earth waited for his response. "Send no reply," he said. "Let them wonder." For 10 days, Earth was silent. The Valorians sent message after message. Each one was ignored. On their ships, officers began to feel the first small hints of unease. This was not normal. Conquered species always begged and negotiated in their final days. The humans did nothing. On the 10th day, the correction fleet left Mars orbit and moved toward Earth. 12 cruisers, each one a mile long, each one carrying enough firepower to reduce the planet to ash. Commander Rethan stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on his screen. It was a beautiful world, green and blue and white. It seemed almost ashamed to destroy it. "Open a channel to the surface," he ordered. "Give them one final chance to surrender." The channel opened. For a long moment, there was only static. Then a human voice spoke. It was calm and steady, showing no fear. "This is General Marcus Webb, speaking for all of humanity. We have received your demands. We have considered them carefully. And we have decided to give you our answer in person. Please come and collect it." Then the channel went dead. Rethan stared at the screen in confusion. "What does that mean?" Before anyone could answer, alarms began to scream across the ship. The tactical officer's face went pale. "Commander," he said, his voice shaking, "we are detecting launches, thousands of launches, from every continent, from the oceans, from everywhere." Rethan looked at the screen. It showed Earth covered in tiny points of light. Missiles, thousands of them, rising from the surface like angry hornets from a nest. "Raise shields," he ordered. "Prepare point defense. Destroy them before they reach us." His officers rushed to obey, but deep in his stomach, Rethan felt something he had not felt in centuries. Something he had almost forgotten. Fear. The first wave of missiles reached the fleet 30 minutes later. They were crude things by Valorian standards. Simple rockets with simple warheads. The point defense systems shot them down easily. Hundreds of explosions lit up the space around the fleet. Nothing got through. Rethan allowed himself to relax. Is that the best they can do? Then the second wave hit. This wave was different. These missiles did not try to penetrate the shields. Instead, they detonated at a distance. Each one released a cloud of metal fragments, spreading out in all directions. Millions of tiny pieces, each one moving at incredible speed. The shield stopped most of them, But shields were designed to stop large threats, not millions of small ones. Some fragments got through. They punched holes in the hull. They destroyed sensors. They killed crew members. And then came the third wave. These missiles did not carry explosives at all. They carried nuclear weapons. But they did not aim at the ships. Instead, they detonated in space, high above the Earth. The electromagnetic pulses hit the fleet like invisible hammers. Lights flickered. Computers crashed. Shields failed. For 30 terrible seconds, the Valorian fleet was blind and deaf. When their systems came back online, Commander Rethon saw something that made his blood run cold. Human ships, hundreds of them, rising from the Earth, coming straight toward his fleet. They were ugly ships, crude ships, built from human steel and powered by human rockets. They had no shields. They had no advanced weapons. But they had nuclear missiles. And they had something else, something Rethon had never seen before. Courage, madness, a willingness to die that no sane species could match. The Battle of Earth had begun. Commander Rethon had conquered 40 worlds in his long career. He had faced enemies with better technology. He had faced enemies with larger armies. He had faced enemies who fought bravely and well. He had never faced anything like this. The human ships came at his fleet like a swarm of insects. They were small and fragile. His weapons destroyed dozens of them in the first minute. But for every ship he destroyed, 10 more took its place. And they did not stop. They did not slow down. They came faster and faster, straight at his cruisers. "What are they doing?" one of his officers asked in confusion. "They cannot penetrate our armor. They have no weapons that can hurt us." Then the first human ship hit his flagship. It did not try to dock. It did not try to disable the shields. The pilot simply aimed his ship at the cruiser's bridge and accelerated to maximum speed. The explosion tore through 3 decks. 200 Valorian soldiers died in an instant. Rethon stared at the damage in disbelief. They crashed into us? On purpose. Across his fleet, the same thing was happening. Human pilots were driving their ships directly into Valorian cruisers. They were killing themselves to take out enemy vessels. It was insane. It was terrifying. It was working. "Pull back," Rethon ordered. "Get us away from these madmen." But it was too late to pull back. The human ships were everywhere, and now the ground forces were joining the fight. From every continent, missiles continued to launch. But these were not ordinary missiles. These carried something worse: chemical weapons, biological agents, radioactive material. Things that the galaxy had banned thousands of years ago. Things that no civilized species would ever use. The Valorians had no defense against them. Their armor was designed to stop energy weapons and projectiles. It was not designed to stop gas that ate through metal. It was not designed to stop diseases that had been engineered in human laboratories. It was not designed to stop radiation that cooked soldiers inside their own suits. Ground troops began to land on several continents. They expected to face primitive armies with primitive weapons. Instead, they found hell. In the forests of Russia, Valorian soldiers walked into traps that humans had been perfecting for centuries. Mines that sprayed metal fragments in all directions. Pits filled with sharpened sticks, tripwires connected to grenades. For every step forward, they paid in blood. In the deserts of the Middle East, human fighters appeared from nowhere, fired their weapons, and vanished again. They knew the land. They knew every rock and every dune. The Valorians had better weapons, but they did not know where to aim them. In the cities of America and Europe, human soldiers fought from building to building. They used the ruins as cover. They set fires to blind enemy sensors. They collapsed buildings on advancing troops. Every block became a fortress. Every street became a killing ground. And the humans would not surrender, no matter how many of them died, no matter how hopeless the situation became. Captain Yuri Volkov led a Russian tank battalion against a Valorian landing force outside Moscow. His tanks were old. His ammunition was running low. Half his men were already dead. He did not care. "Forward," he shouted over the radio. "For Earth, for humanity." His tanks charged straight at the alien lines. The Valorians cut them down with plasma fire. Volkov's tank was hit. It caught fire. He could feel the heat burning his skin. He kept driving. His tank slammed into an alien troop transport at full speed. The explosion killed him instantly. It also killed 300 Valorian soldiers. Across the planet, the same scene repeated itself over and over. Human soldiers dying by the thousands, taking Valorians with them every time, fighting with a fury that the galaxy had never seen. Commander Rethan watched the battle reports with growing horror. He was winning. His forces were still superior. His technology was still better, but the cost was beyond anything he had imagined. "We have lost 4 cruisers," his tactical officer reported. "Ground forces report 60% casualties. Ammunition reserves are at 40%. Rethan looked at the numbers in disbelief. 60% casualties. In his entire career, he had never lost more than 5% against a primitive species. "How is this possible?" he asked. "They are nothing. They are primitives. They should have surrendered by now." "They do not surrender," his officer said quietly. "They do not retreat. They do not negotiate. They only fight." On the screen, Rethan watched a human city burn. His forces had destroyed it completely. There was nothing left but rubble and ash. But even now, human soldiers were crawling out of the ruins, weapons in hand, ready to fight again. "They are insane," he whispered. On the ground, Lieutenant Maria Santos led what was left of her platoon through the ruins of São Paulo. She had started with 50 soldiers. Now she had 7. They were out of food. They were almost out of ammunition. They had not slept in 3 days. Behind them, Valorian troops were closing in. She could hear their strange language, their heavy footsteps. They would catch up within the hour. "What do we do, Lieutenant?" one of her soldiers asked. Maria checked her rifle. She had 17 bullets left. She also had 1 grenade, one very special grenade. "We make them pay," she said. "Every bullet, every drop of blood. We make it cost them so much that they never forget." She led her soldiers into an ambush position. When the Valorians came, they opened fire. They killed dozens before they ran out of ammunition. Then they fought with knives, then with their bare hands. When Maria was the last one standing, she pulled the pin on her grenade. It was not an ordinary grenade, it was nuclear. A small nuclear device just big enough to destroy a city block. "For Earth," she whispered. The explosion lit up the night sky. It killed Maria. It killed 300 Valorian soldiers, and it sent a message to every alien watching. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not kneel. Humanity would die standing, fighting, screaming defiance to the last breath. In orbit, Commander Rethan made a decision. He had lost too much. The cost was too high. This was supposed to be a simple correction, not a war of extinction. "All ship," he ordered, his voice heavy with shame. "Retreat. Return to Mars orbit. We need reinforcements." As his surviving cruisers limped away from Earth, he sent a message to the Dominion. It was a message that would change the galaxy forever. Do not underestimate the humans. Do not mock their weapons. Do not assume they will surrender. They are unlike any species we have ever faced. They have made war into their religion. They worship death and destruction. They are insane. He paused before adding the final words. "Send everything we have. These primitives have shown us something we forgot long ago. They have shown us what it truly means to fight, and I am afraid of what they will become if we do not stop them now." On Earth, the survivors looked up at the retreating alien ships. They did not celebrate. They knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning. But for the first time, they allowed themselves to hope. They had faced the masters of the galaxy and made them bleed. They had proven that humanity was not prey. Humanity was a predator, and it had just tasted blood. The news of Earth's victory spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size watched the recordings in stunned silence. They saw human ships crashing into Valorian cruisers. They saw human soldiers fighting until the last bullet, then fighting with knives, then with rocks, then with their bare hands. They saw a species that simply refused to die. The Valorian Dominion had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. No species had ever resisted them successfully. No species had ever made them retreat. Until now. On the mining world of Kether Prime, The ancient Cathari stopped their eternal meditation and gathered to watch the recordings. They had not engaged in warfare for 3,000 years. They had believed that violence was beneath enlightened beings. Now they were not so sure. "Look at them," the eldest Cathari whispered. "They fight as if death means nothing. They fight as if losing is not an option." "They are insane," another replied. "Yes," the elder agreed, "but perhaps insanity is what the galaxy needs." On the trading stations of the void merchants, clever beings with too many eyes counted their profits and made new calculations. Human weapons were suddenly very valuable. Human tactics were worth their weight in gold. And the humans themselves were now the most interesting species in the galaxy. "We must contact them," the head merchant decided. "We must trade with them. They have something we want." "What?" his assistant asked. The merchant smiled with all three of his mouths. "Hope." And in the dark corners of the galaxy, where the Dominion subjects whispered their secrets, a new question was being asked. If these primitives could resist, why couldn't they? The Dominion was not blind to the danger. Within days of Commander Rethan's retreat, the High Council gathered in emergency session. For the first time in millennia, there was fear in their voices. "This cannot be allowed to stand," High Commander Vethan declared. "One primitive species has humiliated us in front of the entire galaxy. If we do not respond with overwhelming force, others will be inspired to resist." "What do you suggest?" the council leader asked. "Total war. Mobilize the Second Fleet. 200 warships. Enough firepower to reduce their planet to ash." The council leader nodded slowly. "Do it. But this time, do not underestimate them. Study their tactics. Learn their weaknesses. And show no mercy." The Second Fleet began to gather at the edge of the human solar system. 200 ships, 10 times the force that had been defeated before, each one filled with soldiers who had been shown the recordings of the first battle. Soldiers who knew that they were facing something new, something dangerous. On Earth, humanity prepared for the final battle. They knew the aliens would return. They knew the next attack would be much worse. And they knew they might not survive. But they refused to give up. In secret shipyards around the world, engineers worked day and night. They used everything they had learned from the captured Valorian technology. They combined it with human weapons, human creativity, and human cruelty. The result was ugly. It was crude. It was terrifying. They called them the revenge ships. General Webb inspected the new fleet with grim satisfaction. "How many do we have?" 50 combat vessels, Admiral Tanaka of Japan reported. "Another 100 support ships. Not enough to match their fleet, but enough to hurt them." "And the special weapons?" Tanaka's face darkened. "Ready? I still think we should not use them. They are too dangerous, too unpredictable." "They laughed at our weapons," Webb said quietly. "They called us primitives. Let them see just how primitive we can be." The Valorian fleet entered the solar system 6 months after the first battle. They moved slowly, carefully. They had learned to respect human tricks, but they were not prepared for what waited for them at Jupiter. The human fleet emerged from behind the giant planet. 50 warships, surrounded by hundreds of smaller vessels. They were nothing compared to the Valorian armada. David facing Goliath with a slingshot. High Commander Vethan watched the human fleet with contempt. "Is this all they have? We will destroy them in minutes." "Sir," his tactical officer said carefully, "they are broadcasting on all frequencies. The entire galaxy is watching." Vethan smiled coldly. "Good. Let them watch. Let them see what happens to those who resist the Dominion." On the bridge of the human flagship, Admiral Chen stood before a camera that would broadcast his words to trillions of beings across the galaxy. "My name is Chen Wei. I speak for Earth. I speak for humanity. Today we face the largest fleet the Dominion has ever sent against a single species. They expect us to run. They expect us to beg for mercy. They expect us to die." He paused, letting his words sink in. "They are right about one thing. Many of us will die today, but we will not run. We will not beg. We will fight with everything we have. And when this battle is over, the galaxy will know that there is a species that cannot be conquered, a species that would rather burn than bow." He looked directly into the camera. "To every slave of the Dominion, To every species that has forgotten what freedom means, I say this: watch us. Watch what a free people can do when they have nothing left to lose. Then he gave the order to attack. The Battle of Jupiter was the most terrible battle the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships charged straight at the Valorian lines, ignoring the withering fire that destroyed them by the dozen. They used every weapon they had: nuclear missiles, chemical warheads, ships filled with explosives driven by pilots who knew they would not survive. The Valorians had better weapons. They had more ships. They had every advantage except one. The humans did not care if they died. For 6 hours the battle raged. Human ships exploded one after another, but each one took Valorians with it. Each one made the Dominion pay in blood. And across the galaxy, trillions watched in wonder. On Kether Prime, the ancient Kethari began to teach their young the forgotten art of war. On the trading stations, the void merchants quietly began to arm their ships. And in the dark corners of the Dominion, slaves began to sharpen their hidden weapons. The battle ended with the human fleet destroyed. Only 5 ships escaped back to Earth, but the Valorian fleet had lost over half its vessels. More than 100 warships gone, 100,000 soldiers dead. Vethin stared at the wreckage in disbelief. He had won, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like he had grabbed a burning torch with his bare hands. And the worst part was the message that had been broadcast across the galaxy. The message that was now spreading like a virus, infecting the minds of every conquered species. If these primitives can hurt them, the slaves whispered to each other, why can't we? The rebellion began the very next day. The rebellion started on the mining world of Tethra. It was a small planet, covered in dust and rock. The Dominion had ruled it for 3,000 years. The people of Tethra had forgotten what freedom looked like. They had forgotten how to fight. Then they watched the humans fight at Jupiter. They watched a species that was supposed to be primitive, that was supposed to be helpless, stand against the greatest fleet in the galaxy and refuse to break. On the night after the battle, a young Tethran named Kala picked up a mining tool and drove it into the skull of her overseer. By morning, the planet was in flames. Within a week, 12 more worlds had risen up. The Dominion tried to crush each rebellion, but for every fire they put out, 3 more ignited. The conquered species were not just fighting with anger, they were fighting with something they had not felt in centuries: hope. Human weapons began appearing on rebel worlds. Not advanced weapons, simple things: rifles, explosives, knives. The void merchants had been busy. They sold human technology to anyone who could pay, and they sold it cheap. How do these primitive weapons work? A rebel leader on Kether Prime asked his human advisor. Captain James Miller, one of the survivors of the Battle of Jupiter, showed him how to load a rifle. Point this end at your enemy. Pull this trigger. It fires a piece of metal very fast. That's it. The Kethari leader looked at the weapon with wonder. It is so simple. That's the point, Miller said. Our weapons are not complicated. Anyone can learn to use them. Anyone can learn to kill with them. That is what makes them dangerous. The Kethari smiled. It was the first smile his species had made in 1,000 years. We have much to learn from you. The Dominion was falling apart. For 10,000 years it had ruled through fear. It had convinced its subjects that resistance was impossible. Now that lie had been exposed. Now the conquered species could see that the masters of the galaxy could bleed. High Commander Vethin received the reports with growing despair. Rebellions on 50 worlds. His fleet was stretched thin, trying to maintain order everywhere at once, and the humans were still out there, still fighting, still refusing to die. We must destroy Earth, he told the High Council. We must gather every ship we have and reduce that planet to dust. Only then will the rebellions end. Only then will the galaxy remember to fear us. The council leader hesitated. If we pull our ships from the rebellions, we will lose dozens of worlds. We will lose everything if we do not act now, Vethin insisted. Earth is the symbol. Earth is the inspiration. Destroy Earth, and hope dies with it. And so the Dominion made its final gamble. Every available ship was pulled from across the galaxy. 300 warships gathered at the edge of the human solar system. The largest fleet in galactic history. Enough firepower to destroy 100 worlds. On Earth, humanity received the news with grim acceptance. They had always known this day would come. They had always known that the Dominion would eventually commit everything to destroying them. They had also made preparations. Ships began arriving at Earth from across the galaxy. Rebel vessels from a dozen species. The Cathari, who had not fought in 3,000 years, sent their new warships. The Void merchants, who had never taken sides in any conflict, sent armed trading vessels. Even species that had been enemies for centuries came together. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of his rebuilt flagship and watched the combined fleet assemble. It was still smaller than the Dominion Armada. It was still outgunned. But it was not just a human fleet anymore. It was a galactic alliance. "How many ships do we have?" he asked. 230, his tactical officer reported, from 18 different species. Chen nodded slowly. "Open a channel to all ships, to the entire galaxy." The channel opened. Trillions of beings across 1,000 worlds watched and listened. "My name is Chen Wei. I speak for Earth. I speak for humanity. And today, I speak for every species that has ever been enslaved, conquered, or crushed beneath the boot of tyranny." He paused, letting his words carry across the stars. "The Dominion is coming with everything they have. They think if they destroy us, hope will die. They are wrong. Hope cannot be killed with warships and weapons. Hope lives in the hearts of those who refuse to surrender. It lives in every slave who dreams of freedom. It lives in every child who wonders what lies beyond the chains." He looked directly at the camera. "We are not special. We are not chosen. We are simply a species that refuse to stop fighting. If we can stand against tyranny with nothing but fire and iron, so can you. The Dominion taught the galaxy to kneel. Today we teach it to rise." The battle began at the orbit of Mars. 300 Dominion ships against 230 Allied vessels. It was the largest battle the galaxy had ever seen, and it was the most brutal. Human ships led the charge, just as they had at Jupiter. They crashed into enemy formations with nuclear fury. Behind them came the Cathari, ancient warriors awakening to a new age of violence. Behind them came the Void merchants, their trading ships now armed with weapons from a dozen worlds. The Dominion fought back with desperate fury. Their weapons were still superior. Their ships were still stronger. But they were fighting something they had never faced before: unity, purpose, rage that had been building for 10,000 years. High Commander Vethin watched his fleet crumble and knew that he was witnessing the end of an empire. The Dominion had ruled through fear, and now that fear had turned to fury. Every conquered species was fighting not just for Earth, but for themselves, for their children, for a future without chains. "Order the retreat," he whispered. "Sir?" his tactical officer asked in shock. "Order the retreat. It is over. We have lost." The Dominion fleet began to withdraw, but there was nowhere to go. The rebellions had spread too far. There was no safe port, no friendly world waiting to welcome them. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years was falling apart around them. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Chen watched the enemy fleet scatter. Behind him, his crew was cheering. Across the combined fleet, thousands of beings were celebrating. They had done the impossible. They had broken the unbreakable. But Chen did not celebrate. He was thinking about the future. 3 years later, the galaxy was still recovering. The Dominion had collapsed completely. Former masters were now prisoners or refugees. Former slaves were now free to build their own worlds, their own futures. Earth had become the center of a new alliance, not an empire. The humans refused to become what they had fought to destroy. Instead, they offered something different: trade, cooperation, mutual defense, and most importantly, the freedom to choose. Ambassador Kala of Tethra stood before the new Galactic Council and looked at the human delegation with something close to reverence. "When I was a child," she said, "I was taught that resistance was impossible. I was taught that the Dominion would rule forever. I was taught to accept my chains and be grateful for them." She paused, remembering the night she had picked up that mining tool. Then the humans came. They showed us something we had forgotten. They showed us that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fighting anyway. They showed us that freedom is not given, it is taken. They showed us that even the mightiest empire can fall when ordinary beings refuse to surrender. She turned to address Admiral Chen, who now served as Earth's representative to the Council. The galaxy will never forget what it witnessed. We will never forget the primitives who fought with fire and iron. We will never forget the species that taught us to rise. Chen stood and faced the Council. He was older now, gray-haired and scarred from battles that had seemed impossible to survive. "We are not heroes," he said simply. "We are not saviors. We are simply human. We fight because we must. We endure because we have no choice. And we will stand with anyone, anywhere who chooses to be free." He looked out at the assembled delegates from across the galaxy. They laughed at our weapons. They called us primitives. They thought our ancient war machines were jokes. A small smile crossed his weathered face. They were wrong. Those weapons were not primitive. They were perfected. Perfected through 10,000 years of killing each other. And when the galaxy threatened our home, we turned those weapons outward. He raised his hand in a simple salute. The galaxy bore witness, and the galaxy will remember. Outside the council chambers, the stars burned cold and eternal. Somewhere out there, new civilizations were being born. New threats were rising, new challenges waited to be faced. But for now, for this moment, the galaxy was free. And it had one small, violent, stubborn species to thank for it. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through peace, not through diplomacy, through fire and iron and a refusal to ever stop fighting. The ancients had a saying, "Be careful who you laugh at. You never know who will have the last laugh." The humans had laughed last, and the galaxy would never forget the sound.